Okay, so nominations committees, the nominations committee, and I chair several, was very much the poor relation of committees that were sub the board, and it might have met once a year or on an ad hoc basis to talk about the CEO and CFO or risk succession if you're in a regulated business. Whereas now it's got a much broader oversight of areas such as the pipeline, as we discussed earlier, what we might need in future NEDs, and also thinking about how we go about meeting the strategic goals for the organisation. So there's a much more creative partnership with HR. And if you are lucky enough to have high caliber HR people, then it works really, really well in terms of getting insight into the talent that's available and the skills and capabilities that are needed on the board. The other area that we have to spend a lot of time looking at, and this has become even more key in COVID times, is how the nominations committee links up with other committees such as remuneration and risk. And certainly in the UK, we have many packages, and I think there are in a number of other countries, which will support businesses in crisis. But the shareholder community are saying they need, if they're not getting their dividends, and if the organisation is getting help from the government, they need to see the executives and the board take their equal share of the pain. So we know that if we come up with packages and bonuses and LTIPs and so on, which are not reflective of the current circumstances and could potentially lead to a big windfall for executives, those businesses that are listed will actually have significant shareholder votes against those packages. Now, that presents me with an issue at the moment, in that just as we were going into the COVID lockdown, we needed to change a CEO in one of our businesses. And we're already being told the pension has to be capped, the package has to be capped, when we're trying to attract some really top talent into the role, because we'll have to go into a significant reinvention of the business as we come out of these COVID times. So that's presenting us with several significant challenges. The other challenge is around interviewing people on Zoom, and a concern of how can you make such a key appointment as, for instance, the CEO, when you're interviewing on Zoom, and there's still some cynicism about the caliber of references that come in for people. So, it really is challenging our thought processes as to how we work together as an organisation and a board, and then how the NomCo links in with remuneration and risk. And you know what we're like in the UK, we're a bit schizophrenic. So we have nominations committees, remuneration committees, and HR committees. So, depending on the organisations you're involved in, you could have the whole range. And I personally think it will evolve over time, because as the remit of the board gets further and further stretched, which it is doing now, into areas that boards didn't look at in the past, then we will start to have some sort of normalisation in terms of committees and their terms of reference. So, new trends in thinking. We do spend more time in committees and in the board thinking about the leadership landscape flow. So who is around, what do we need to develop them, and the depth of that leadership cadre. And that's where we hit problems such as diversity issues and pipeline issues in terms of that. It's also where now, because we're looking at, certainly across all the boards I'm involved with, and most of the big international companies I talk to are talking about keeping more home working going forward. And that does lead to a different kind of leadership and a more connected and personal and empathic kind of leadership. So thinking about how you keep your teams connected when they're not coming into the office is important. Also thinking through, if you do need some people in the office, how you safeguard them, because some people are really quite nervous, particularly around public transport, and don't want to come back in. So how do you deal with that? And I've heard a range of, well, we might say, if you don't come back in, then you've breached your contract, which I think is an appalling stance, through to, actually, we've made this work for the last 8 weeks or so, let's continue to do that. So these are areas that we're looking at. We're also doing quite a lot of benchmarking of the executive strength and depth that we've got, as well as looking at these future skills, and basically giving people more formative feedback. And this is a shift from people being on the promotion grid for many years, and then life changes and they're suddenly not fit for purpose for the future. So giving people more feedback in real time about the changing landscape, so that they can think about how they develop, and we can think about as a board how we develop them, be it stretch assignments, be it particular programs and so on. So that's another key area that we're working on. And interestingly, when I talk to chairmen, a number of them don't like giving feedback to their individual board members. And yet the thing that the individual board members love about the board evaluation process is they get feedback on their skills and capabilities and what they could perhaps do more of or less of, which is really quite helpful. So, you know, there's a lot more about what do we do to free up the organisation, to develop the talent, to move people forward. And, you know, these are really, really rich discussions at board level, both on a periodic basis, but at the moment, as I said, on a number of the boards, on a very regular basis, because we're meeting weekly, which has its own challenges because we don't want to do the job of the executive. One of the bits of counsel I always give the boards that I chair is we're there to support the executive in these difficult times, but to get out of their way when they need that time to execute and move things forward. So it's changing the whole nature of the conversations that we're having, and I think it's changing them for the better. Some of the other trends that we see is much more transparency across a whole range of areas of the business, but particularly in terms of people's well-being and development. So that's very good. And on certainly 2 of the boards I'm on, we've asked each non-executive to adopt an area of the business, so they're having more in-depth discussions with those business leaders about the issues and challenges they're facing. And we've also put in place processes where if they ask us to give people recognition for going above and beyond, we're putting in personal calls to those people, we're putting in hero schemes, and just basically doing on the spot recognition, which is going down so well. So that's another area there. So post-COVID, a lot of things are changing. Organisations that told me we cannot possibly work in an agile way are now doing that. We've had letters of commendation for the way in which we have literally just transformed our working patterns and our IT platforms overnight to enable our committee meetings to go ahead, our referrals to go ahead. And yet, when I first joined that organisation 20 months ago, people said to me, this cannot happen, and it now is. So, you know, there's a lot of things happening that really will change the way in which we work. Virtual AGMs, I find a much more pleasant experience than some of the face-to-face ones, I have to say, which is good. And also the board communication. There is much more update information coming through to the organisation than the board, which enables us to feel far more connected, which I think is great. What will stick post all of this? I don't know. Some things will. I hope we never go back to travelling in the way we've done around the world. I was one of the guilty ones, travelling really regularly for my different boards because they're global boards. And, you know, A, it's exhausting, and B, it just doesn't need to happen unless you want to have a visible presence on site if you have sites around the world. And even then, I think we can think of other ways of doing that. The other thing that I'm certainly finding is the committee meetings are much more focused, and we get through the business far, far quicker than, you know, if you're away on a 2-day, you know, all your committee meetings, then your board meeting. I find that is a much more positive way of working. And there's also much more awareness of reputation management. You talked earlier about an organisation that has handled, I think it was, really handled extremely well the way in which they have dealt with their workforce. And, you know, people will remember this for a long time. Did they feel valued? Did they feel supported? Were the board making the right decisions at the right time and supporting the organisation? And were they behaving in the right way and encouraging the executives to? So I think there's a lot of really positive things that will come out post-COVID. And my personal view is we will be a kinder and more empathic world going forward, and should be more connected as well. So, you know, a lot of things are changing in terms of work processes, work patterns, a lot more efficient remote working, which is great, and the speed with which, as I mentioned earlier, we move towards it. People are not finding that they're as lonely, by and large, on the organisations I'm involved with, but we do have gin and tonic events, we have WhatsApp groups, we have weekly team meetings, we buddy up in various organisations so people don't feel isolated. And where we spot signs, and one of the issues, again, I'm not quoting companies, but one of the big concerns for us has been the increase in domestic violence, which some of our employees have suffered because of being in lockdown, and that's been a real problem. So we're having to look at different things that perhaps wouldn't have come to the board previously. We also want to spend time thinking about new ideas, new ways of doing things, you know, B2C, B2B, digital platforms for people to purchase from. We are doing a lot, particularly in the drinks industry, to support our supplier base and our stakeholders. So we're looking at loans to publicans and restaurateurs to help them bounce back from all of this, lifting the kegs, bringing it back. So, you know, stuff that it's really important that we do, and we make sure it happens. In addition to that, you know, as you were saying earlier, we want to make sure that all of our employees, whether they are contract employees, whether they're direct employees, feel they have been well handled throughout this crisis and that we have cared about what's been happening for them. So, you know, there's been a lot more interaction. I was saying to one of my CEOs the other day that an employee of ours who I'd regularly swing by her desk when I was in the office and have a chat, I was lucky if I could get more than a few words out of her. She was on the phone for 45 minutes and told me far more about her life than I have ever heard before. So, you know, the richness of those conversations, the natural inquisitiveness that means people like to look into somebody's study, house, you know, what's their sort of decoration like, what paintings have they got, it's been really quite interesting from that point of view. So I think it's really changed and transformed the way the boards that I'm involved with work. And I've also heard that from a number of our clients. And so it is going to be a very different world in my view. So thank you everybody for your time.